A mother recently asked me a question that I think a lot of parents will think about when their baby is diagnosed with a hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy or an HIE brain injury. And what she asked me was this: Will my baby ever be normal, Marcus? Will my child be normal? And when parents hear those words, a brain injury, and that's connected to their newborn, their minds can immediately jump into the future. They can immediately start thinking about, well, will my child ever walk? Will my child ever talk? Will my child be able to live independently? And that is one of the hardest questions, I think, for families to ask after an HIE diagnosis. And the truth is that early on, the answer to that question is not always going to be very simple. And so today I want to talk about why doctors cannot immediately predict with certainty the future after an HIE diagnosis, and what families can begin asking as they learn more about their baby's condition. So the first thing is, let's go ahead and let's define, or let's talk about what HIE actually is. HIE is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, and it's a type of brain injury that can happen when a baby's brain does not receive enough oxygen and blood flow for a period of time. And today I'm specifically talking about situations where that oxygen deprivation occurs during labor or delivery, when something interferes with oxygen delivery to the baby. And with thinking about all of this, you have to understand that the severity of that interruption, that's going to matter, because doctors will often describe HIE as either mild, moderate, or severe. And those categories can sometimes give parents early clues about possible outcomes, but that's not going to always tell the entire story with all of it. And one reason is because it's difficult to answer the question about your child's future right away, is that the brain development happens over time. It unfolds over time. And doctors, they may look at neurological exams, they may looking at your baby's feeding ability, muscle tone, seizure activity, MRI imaging of the brain. All of those things can provide information to the doctors. But even with those tools and that information, the brain is still going to continue to develop as the child grows. And some developmental changes, you might not see those until later stages down the line. And that uncertainty, I think, is what makes in the early days after an HIE diagnosis, that's what can make all of this so difficult for families. But there's something important that I think that families and parents, that they can ask of their doctors that may help them better be able to understand what the doctors are watching for as their baby grows. Families can ask which area or areas of the brain have been impacted by this injury. And that's because different parts of the brain will control different functions. So, for example, some areas of the brain will be responsible for movement and muscle control. You can have other areas of the brain that will be responsible for coordination and for balance. And then you'll have other areas that will help, or they will control vision. Other areas will play a role in language and with learning and with memory and with behavior. So when families understand which parts of the brain have been involved on the MRI, it can help them begin to ask more focused follow-up questions. So, for example, you might have a parent that may want to ask whether the areas involved, whether they can affect your baby's movement, or whether it's going to affect speech or vision or language as your child grows up. This does not give a perfect prediction about the future, but what it can do is help families be able to understand better what the doctors are monitoring as that development is unfolding. Another important thing to understand is the outcomes after an HIE diagnosis. They're going to exist on a spectrum. Some babies with a mild HIE brain injury, they may go on to develop naturally or normally and not have too many challenges. Some children may experience learning challenges or they may have developmental delays. And some children may develop more significant conditions such as CP, or cerebral palsy, seizure disorders, or other types of intellectual disabilities. HIE, that we know, HIE is one of the causes of CP, but it doesn't automatically lead to a CP diagnosis in every child. And one of the reasons many families will associate HIE and cerebral palsy is because children with a more severe diagnosis are at a higher risk for those types of outcomes. And many families who contact birth injury lawyers like myself, they're generally dealing with moderate to severe HIE diagnosis, which means that the challenges that their children are facing tend to be more significant. Another important thing for families, I think, to focus on is going to be early intervention. When you have therapies such as physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy or developmental support programs, all of these things can play a very important role in helping children reach their developmental potential. Now, saying all of this and returning to that initial question, which is, will my baby ever be normal? What those parents are really asking is, what will their child's life look like? Again, they're wondering, will my child be able to walk? Will my child be able to talk? Will my child be able to learn and be able to go to school? What is going to happen to my child after I pass away? These answers often can take time to unfold as your child grows up. And for many families, another question eventually becomes part of that process, because then they begin to want to understand what happened during labor and delivery. If the HIE occurred during that time, during labor or during delivery, families oftentimes they want to know whether there were warning signs that were present and whether earlier intervention by the doctors or the nurses or the hospital could have changed the outcome for their baby. Sometimes the answer to that question is going to be no, nothing could have been done. Some injuries, despite appropriate care, sometimes babies will still suffer these types of injuries. But a careful review of the labor and delivery records can sometimes provide answers to those questions and can in some instances lead to the idea that medical malpractice potentially caused this baby's HIE brain injury. Again, I'm Marcus Boston, and if you have any other questions about your baby's HIE brain injury at birth or a subsequent CP or cerebral palsy diagnosis from a medical legal standpoint, don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. You can find out more information about me in my profile. My information is there. If you're watching this video on certain apps, you can send me a DM and we could chat a little bit about your baby story, or you could just wait and watch the picture that follows the end of this video. All right, that's going to be it for today's quick educational video. Have a great day, everybody.